one of the things that strikes me when one of the beauties of being a preaching pastor is you get to you are forced to revisit the scriptures again and again in a different way because my John Stott talked about the preaching profession as being stuck between two worlds. You're always trying to deal with this Bible and talk to people at it, on Florin Road in 2024. And I talked to them in 2020, and I talked to them in 2016, and I talked to them in 2000, and I talked to them in 97. So it's a long obedience in the same direction. But one of the things that as I continue to read Jesus and the Gospels, I get a sense of Jesus saying regularly, just like the difference between cold air and hot air in terms of the amount of moisture those different airs can hold. This dispensation, this world we're living in, marked between the first and the second comings of Jesus, can only hold so much. And I'm not quite sure how to categorize that which it can hold, but and because it can only hold so much, the presence of God in this world will have certain consequences. The cross itself is the consequence of that. And of course, the prologue to the Gospel of John talks about it, that when God comes into this world, it's the day of the Lord. That's what the day of the Lord is. It's the revelation of the presence of God in the world. And so it looks like the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. And so what you just sort of sketched out in terms of this relationship is vital. And it's not just now. It's not just modern secular civilization. It's all civilization. And
Hmm.
so in that sense, the evocative image of the New Jerusalem is, I think, in some ways a
Hmm.
resolution of this tension.
Nice. Yeah. So can I say that back to you?
Yes, please do.
And this is for the purposes of making it a richer thing, because what you said was correct and good. And I'm just going to say it back to you in a different set of words so that more of it can land for more. So there's a kind of world, and I've just articulated two deeply distinct kinds of world. There's the indigenous world and there's a civilized world. And we can just put a line between them. There are different kinds of worlds, profoundly distinct in nature and how they operate.
And there are indigenous worlds and civilized worlds. It's not just one, but there is a oneness about them too. So keep going.
This is a point. There's something about the Bronze Age and the Roman era and Western civilization that are all participating in a kind, like a very big meta kind that is itself as a meta kind very, very fundamentally, the whole point is fundamentally, intrinsically distinct from a meta kind that attaches to the Iroquois and the Polynesians and the Shuar and the Aborigines. The Aborigines on the whole to the side because that's a very old lineage. They may be doing something even deeper than I can understand. Um, and in the world of the technological, we've been able to identify these things that are called S curves in technical innovation. And these are like microkinds, right? So there's a moment where you're doing what are they called? Vacuum tubes. And that moment has an S curve, meaning that we don't know how to do them yet, and we're not very good at it, but we're getting better at it. Oh, we're really good at it. Now we're using them a lot. Yeah, but we've kind of done the best we can with them, and now they're starting to get a little bit played out. And what happens, of course, is then transistors come. So we get these nested S curves. And as it turns out, you can use that same model to look at what's been happening in the arc of civilization. That there's something that happened in the civilization nature of the Roman world that reached an S curve. And when it collapses, it doesn't collapse back into the Roman world. It collapses up into this new S curve, right? That has the process of the dark ages at the bottom. And then we got pretty good at it. And then we're all right. But what's interesting about this is that if you actually, this is a very practical, this is empirical, what I'm saying. If you do the analysis of these S curves, the duration of each S curve, the space between them gets shorter.
Hmm.
This is the accelerating change dynamic that's been noticed by many people from a lot of different backgrounds. It's not just Kurzweil. He's like the least relevant of people who've looked at this. And a number of different people who have looked at it have said, hey, wow, this is weird. It kind of looks like we're actually reaching something where the meta S curve of, let's say, civilization is reaching a point where it's the big picture, right? So we've got all these nested S curves of civilizations that we can talk about, and we can actually begin to organize them on a timeline of how they relate to each other. And when we do that, we begin to notice, huh, huh, it seems like we're actually are coming to the end of this big S curve that's been going on since Sumeria and is coming to a head kind of right now, like in the next 2 decades or so, which is super relevant. Like that's a short time for the end of all things.
Yes.
um, but your point, right? Your point is this is the day of the Lord. Right? The day of the Lord is in fact at hand. And I'm saying this now in a completely different way, and yet it's profoundly correlate. Um, we are coming to the end of something where we can begin to notice that it has endness. Like we froze. What was the last thing you heard?
It stopped. We are coming to the end of something.
End. So we could just set up, you go with that and say that's that, we're done.
We just
Or we
end the
could
video
continue.
right there.
No, sorry. So we're coming to the end of something. And it's the kind of thing where you can diagnose the fact that it has an end as part of its nature
Yes.
and where we are. Right. So it's not that different than a doctor speaking to an 87-year-old man who's in failing health saying, hey, you're coming to the end of something.
Yeah.
This is how it works.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're coming to the end of something. And the thing that we're coming to an end of is much bigger than anything that we have ever witnessed coming to the end of. Right. It's 10,000, 15,000 years in the making.
Yeah.
And that's like I can say that from a secular point of view entirely.
Yeah.
I don't need any eschatological sensibility behind that. And what we then notice is, hey, weird, these two things fit together. Um, so, so there we are. Right? The day of the Lord is coming. In fact, in
Yeah.
some sense, it's breaking through. Like all
Yes.
these things that are happening. You said COVID, even Hiroshima. Like these are like pieces of something popping through, and they're popping through more intensely and more clearly. Um, and it will be really nice. It will be really nice to have in the closet the we have been preparing for the day of the Lord. We have been
Yes.
living in a way that is deeply based on the most fundamental things, right? On the actual strong foundation, so that we can respond. That when the day of the Lord reveals itself
Right.
and indisputably, we step forward into that
Yes.
as opposed to pulling away.
Yes. And you can, in the day of the Lord that happened with the hurricane in the mountains, you can now look back and say, when that day of the Lord came, you look around the community and you know who stood up and who didn't. If there was somebody, a deep prepper who was in their bunker and, they're in there like, I always knew this day was happening and I'm keeping it shut and I'm just going to sit here and watch Seinfeld the whole time. Okay. Well, now we all know who you are. We're leaving open that while there's breath, there's chance for conversion. Um, one of the things that caught my eye this week on Twitter was you retweeted. I've never heard of Voodoo Six Von, um,
Oh,
about Tyson and Paul, because this to me was when I saw this thing being advertised on Netflix, and I thought, wow, again, it's sort of like we have a YouTuber who is not he's not a fighter in, so you have the institution of boxing. I mean, and again, all of this, how is boxing different from a street brawl?
mhm.
And so now we've got Mike Tyson, who is very much an iconic figure from professional boxing, and this other guy who in some ways completely epitomizes the transition that's happening within media, within all institutions. And of course, this happens about at the same time as Trump's reelection. And I'm just thinking, these are the revelations that are breaking through, and reality keeps coming, emerging and erupting and asking, can you see me yet? Can you see me yet? So
Yeah,
talk to me about why this, and I can pull up these set of tweets. I've got them here.
it's
Um,
okay. I remember.
okay.
Um, yeah, so Voodoo, by the way, just his background, Voodoo is a global war on terror. So he was on the ground shooting at people and having being shot at. So he's the person who has experience in that. As it turns out, he's also a pretty profound historian, and so he has a deep sense of history across a variety of different disciplines, specifically mostly Western, not exclusively.
I'll put the link to the tweet in the notes so anybody watching can go back and look.
And he's an anon. I don't know how old he is. He's probably younger than me, but not. He's not a millennial. Maybe he is an old millennial. It's hard to say, but I feel like he's probably more like mid to late 40s is my guess. And I've spoken with him. I haven't spoken with him like this. I don't know what he looks like. All
Yeah.
right, so that's the context. So he writes this thread, and I was chewing on what is going on with this fight, and what was the energy that was being called forth. I was like, I think he nailed it, because one of the parts of what's happening, this notion of the superficial, it maps to things like, do you know Baudrillard at all?
A little bit. I've learned Baudrillard from YouTube, so I don't want to lean too much into it.
Kind of perfect, by the way. But it maps to this notion of Baudrillard's levels. So Baudrillard is at the basic, at the center is in fact reality. Like that's reality. And then you move to these layers of simulation to simulacra. Another word that Eric Weinstein, I think, popularized, kayfabe,
Yep.
which is professional wrestling, where there's this really interesting thing where you're playing with is it real or not? And the fact that it's not real, but we're all kind of conspiring with each other to pretend like it's real, but kind of also conspiring with each other to confuse each other about whether or not it's real. Like it's literally designed to obfuscate the distinction between the simulation and the real. So this is really far out there. And what Voodoo is saying is, from the point of view of somebody for whom death is a lived reality, and what he's saying is, this is how you actually execute the ritual of lineage. Meaning that what could and should have happened is that Paul and Tyson should have met in a deeply committed effort to knock the other one out completely, which penetrates past. It's a day of the Lord. Like it's an actual rubber hits the road. It's David Goliath. It's the energy of kill or be killed, 1 or 0, life or death, like these sacramental moments. It's a sacramental moment that is found in combat.
Yep.
Combat has this reality to it.
Yep.
It's one of the things that we discovered. Oh, by the way, it's one of the reasons why cultural renovation is often found in the military and the monastery, because these are places where our ability to bullshit are finally, they reach their end, they reach their nadir. And when we're actually fighting for our lives, either we get our shit together and win, or our adversary gets their shit together and wins, and one of us is just gone from the earth entirely. So he's invoking that and saying, imagine a world where what happened was the fight went down, and one of two things happened. Either Tyson actually defeats this guy, or Paul defeats Tyson and deals with the consequences of doing that, by the way,
Right.
which are not trivial.
Right.
That's a different world.
Right.
And this is what he was pointing out. That's a different world. And that's a proper world in a very particular sense, because what happened instead is that Paul continued, and we're still living in the aftermath. The Jaguar ad also came out, right? We're not through with this shit yet, but
Yep.
Paul continued the legacy of parasitism, right? The legacy of
Mm.
attaching to the vital traditions, the things that are alive, livingness, and extracting from them, in this case, just money at the end of the day, money and
Yeah.
attention, extracting salience, right?
Yeah.
So trading salience for relevance, to use Johnny V's terms, or trading, how would you say it? Extracting life parasitically is the very nature of the simulacrum. And the restoration of reality requires doing something that grounds that in things in reality that cannot be simulated. And that's the idea, right? If Tyson, if let's say I'm fighting Paul, Paul would beat me up, so it's not very useful. But imagine that I was like a capable fighter. If I'm fighting him and it's actually a, a match that is grounded in will and skill and health and power in a way that is profoundly more fundamental than human, then something real has actually occurred. Right? And that fact of reality is the resyncing, right? That's the checksum that brings people back into a location. And even if the transition is one where Tyson has lost and Paul has won, Paul has done something real. And to have done something real is a revelation for people of his world. They don't even know that something real is possible. So that was, I think, the energy that I was perceiving when I was listening to or perceiving that tweet.
I think that's yes. And I think part of the reason, it's not incidental that it was on Netflix. It's not incidental that it comes at the same time as the election. And now when I look at much is made now of the first move of Trump's new presidency is the selection of the cabinet. And you see RFK Jr. and his uh, make health, make
Make
American
America
healthy
healthy
again,
again. Yeah.
Maha. And you see Dr. Oz, and you see McMahon's, is that his ex-wife? I mean, he certainly isn't still married
No
to,
idea. Yeah.
um, and
Spouse of some sort. Yes.
spouse of some sort, the Secretary of Education. And you begin to look at this, and of course, I mean, one certain what civilization is horrified, and and you were the one that came up with Blue Church. So let's say Blue Church is horrified because in some ways this is so hard. In some ways, ultimately, idolatry is the confusion of our thing with the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the day of the Lord comes to the Blue Church. And so the little scrap of something I put out this morning was when I was listening to The Rest is History's treatment of 1968, because 1968 that was very much a day of the Lord year, where LBJ, who, it's so interesting if we would compare sort of a composite of John F. Kennedy and LBJ, who were very much like this with each other, couldn't stand each other. In some ways, Donald Trump is a combination of John F. Kennedy and LBJ. But what has changed is the iteration of kayfabe around them. I mean, John LBJ would, take out his Johnson and that he called Jumbo, and and show it to his friends and enemies to make a point. Something sort of right out of the Roman Emperor days. John F. Kennedy was urbane and articulate and a Harvard man, and all of these things. And he married you know a woman who would have a fascination for the Greeks, and of course, LBJ would give people the Johnson treatment when he was 6'3" and heavy set, and he was a Southerner, and he'd get up into someone, and you know how it is when somebody, certain kind of man, puts his arm around you and pulls you in tight and makes his point, and you begin to realize, well, this isn't exactly a rape, but
You begin to realize you fucking killed Kennedy, didn't you, dude?
So
Jason, yeah.
but so we've seen this transition. I mean, one of the big transitions that has come has in fact been, okay, we're not going to have Walter Cronkite. We're not going to not say the words. The reporters aren't going to mention that John F. Kennedy is a sexual predator in many ways, and he's also a drug addict, but he's still on the 50 cent piece. Um, and LBJ, on one hand, was a fighter for civil rights from Texas politics, which no one could sort of figure out how that would work, and sort of lost the South for the Democratic Party, and wasn't terribly faithful to Lady Bird, but still in many ways loved her dearly. And then because he had enough something so that when Vietnam went horribly wrong, he could not bear this man who had was probably in some ways one of the most skilled politicians of the 20th century because he had mastered the Senate. He couldn't tolerate being president anymore. And he certainly probably would have walked away into it. But of course, Richard Nixon, a man who was faithful to his wife, a man who was a Quaker, and if there's something that really has deep resonance with Blue Church, it's Quakerism in many ways.
Mm.
Um, and so now we're at this turning from the K. We wouldn't look at Walter Cronkite and say kayfabe, but
No.
now we sort of have to.
But when we look at, say, Rachel Maddow or what's the guy's name from Fox? Shoot, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. We definitely do,
Yes.
right? We are certain that all people who are the Walter Cronkite derivatives are full of it. Right? We're
Yes.
certain. There's not even a question. It's absolute certainty. In fact, they've stipulated as much in lawsuits. we're entertainers. We're not journalists. Okay, great. Yeah. So what happens is you have a situation where, with Reagan, for example,
Yes.
you begin to notice that looking presidential has this weird way of landing more fundamentally than being presidential,
Yes.
by hypothesis. Um, this continues to accelerate. We see get somebody like Obama, where he's able to do the presidential thing at extremely high level, right? He
Yes.
looks and sounds just like you'd want him, like central casting, perfect.
Yeah.
And if the way you perceive reality, or even if what you value is the narrative, right? If you value good cinema, and if you value beautiful writing, then you love Obama, right? He really gives you exactly what you're looking for, and you hate Trump. This
Yeah.
is one of the things that's going on with TDS is that Trump is the absolutely not that, but he's not virtue, and he's not virtue signaling, but he's definitely not virtue signaling, right? The one thing is definitely not as virtue signaling. Nobody can be confused to think that he is doing something to convey to you that he is virtuous in any legible way, right? None of that. Which has,
Except he still goes to court to try to fight. I mean, what do you do with Stormy Daniels? Because if he didn't sleep with her, then we're let down. If he admits he slept with her, then we're let down. And this is where we're at.
oh man, this is where that kfab thing becomes so confusingly potent, right?
Yes.
Because it's like it vibrates. It starts to vibrate at a higher and higher level. Like even the notion of somebody was doing the versions of Hulk Hogan, where you have like these variations where Hulk Hogan is like going into a deeper and deeper rabbit hole of intensity around what the heck is going on. And then of course McMahon, weird to be doing it through the WWF, but I guess that's the point. The fact that the McMahon's, who knows what his spouse's relationship is now officially in the government, or if she gets approved or whatever, confirmed. When McMahon becomes part of the story, right? He steps through the membrane instead of being the owner. He's now participating. The Trump teleports out from the real world into this environment, and everything gets very very bottled up. It's a lot like did you see Jim Carrey's Man in the Moon?
Yes, a while ago. So it's not,
I,
I'll
I
probably have
can't
to rewatch it.
I can't remember the name of the comedian, and if I could, it'd be a little bit
Andy
easier. But
Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman, exactly. So we've got this situation where Andy Kaufman makes existential commitment to pretending to be somebody else. Right?
Yeah.
So deep that he's driving his own family insane. He's going to jail. Like he's just living. So then Jim Carrey plays Andy Kaufman doing that and commits to the bit so much that he loses his. All right, so it's that kind of thing. It's like we're playing with this distinction between reality and our imagination and the way that those things can get deeply, deeply, deeply entangled. And that's different. That's a different kind of thing. It's actually proximal. It's closer to reality. The world of Trump is closer to reality than the world of Obama
Yes.
because it's palpably incapable of being perceived as salient there's something going on, right? It just drives you nuts. And the fact that, the cabinet positions are this wild, like, and the way Elon Musk, shows up in this fashion where on the one hand, he can make rockets that do things that are amazing. And on the other hand, he apparently is somehow playing Diablo at the top level in the world with his left hand while he's tweeting, right? So there's something going on here which doesn't make sense. It actually shatters our ability to try to glue reality together in a nice narrative that we can put together. And maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe kind of the point is that this, again, something is happening. The advent of the sacred, right? Something is
Yes,
happening.
it is the
Much
advent of the
more.
sacred.
Yeah, much more than the individuals involved. And the fact that none of it makes sense is the point.
Yes.